A cycle of violence the world seems powerless to stop. Israel stepped up its attacks on Gaza at dawn. The densely populated city shaken as the bombs fell. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns this may only be the beginning.
Hamas and Islamic Jihad have paid, and I tell you, they will pay a very heavy price for their aggression. I say here tonight, their blood be on their heads.
In Tel Aviv, Palestinian militants overwhelmed Israel's defense system with a barrage of rockets. It's been many years since residents of the coastal city have been forced to shelter in their cellars. The Palestinian Islamists say they too are ready for conflict.
If Israel wants to escalate, we're ready for it. And if it wants to stop, we're also ready. If they want to remove their hand over Jerusalem, we're ready.
Violence also broke out between Israeli Arabs and Jews in Israel. A state of emergency has been declared in Lud. And Arab protesters clashed with Israeli police in al-Fam. It's the worst violence since 2014, and there are fears it could become a full-scale war. World powers now pleading for both sides to put down their weapons.
We are deeply concerned about the escalation between Israel and those launching rockets from Gaza, and we call for restraint and for calm.
But now, both sides are counting their dead and hoping for victory.
And journalist Hazem Balusha is in Gaza City. He joined us earlier to say that there has been heavy bombing there in the past 24 hours.
Today and last night from dawn, actually, the bombing was very intense. It targeted some of the Hamas-run Ministry of Interior buildings widely. The main headquarters of the police were damaged and destroyed. Some other offices as well. Many private houses were targeted. Israel is saying that these houses belong to some of the activists of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We are not sure about that yet. Some private houses were targeted, flats and apartments. Some streets as well were bombed. And the shelling spent all the night and the morning. There were some rockets fired from Gaza as well in the morning. So it was very, very, very hard night for the Gazans.
And let's get more now. We are joined from Jerusalem, where correspondent Tanya Kramer has been reporting. And Tanya, you have actually been speaking with the Israelis. You're talking with the military. Give us a sense of what their campaign is aiming at.
Well, at the moment, Israel is mostly using the Air Force to launch strikes against targets of Hamas and other militant groups in Gaza. We understand that is the strategy for now, to take out as many pre-marked targets as possible, and those lists are actually worked on, in times in between by the Israeli intelligence. So the next step would be then to deploy ground forces. We're talking then about a ground invasion, but there's the sense here this is not the time yet. So there is certainly a military build-up around Gaza. The country is in a massive operation, and we just heard from my colleague in Gaza about the consequences in that. There's a massive operation going on in Gaza from the Israeli side, but the question now is, of course, whether this will expand further and or not, actually, in the coming days or weeks, depending on how long this goes.
That is the big fear among so many, Tanya. The UN's special coordinator for the Middle East, in fact, saying that there is a danger of full-scale war. What is being done, if you could give us a sense diplomatically right now, in order to de-escalate this conflict?
Well, of course, there are calls, especially by the international community, to de-escalate the situation. But we don't get a sense yet that here on the ground, both parties have an interest, at least not for now, because both have been ramping up their rhetorics and their actions in the past 48 hours. And basically, there's also pressure, you have to say, in Israel to respond politically, at least a political pressure to respond what is perceived as an aggression by Hamas and other militant groups from Gaza. Of course, on a more people level, everybody's concerned what is to happen next and where this will end and what results it will actually bring. We are expecting as well mediation efforts. That has been the case in previous of such rounds. Mostly it's then Egypt or Qatar, or of course also the UN and other states that are trying to mediate between the parties. But at the moment, it's not clear what kind of place for maneuvering they have and when and whether that will lead to an end of the hostilities anytime soon.
Tanya Kramer with the view from Jerusalem. Thank you so much. And earlier, I spoke with Avraham Berg. He is the former Speaker of the Israeli Parliament and the former interim President of Israel. I asked him if Israel is being proportionate in its response to the rocket attacks from Hamas.
There are no proportions in wars. War is an unproportional measure. And the situation is not to be judged immediately what happens now. They throw hundreds of rockets on us. We bomb their side. It is what led to it. And what led to it is actually a interesting joint motivation, or interestingly, a common denominator between Hamas and Netanyahu's conservative government. Both do not want to give power to the Palestinian Authority and make peace with it. The Hamas wants to take over the Palestinian Authority and promote its religious and political agenda, and Netanyahu does not want to compromise and sit down and have a reconciliation with the Palestinian Authority, right, because it will lead eventually to a Palestinian state. So both fighting against them.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the political dynamics. But first, if we could just focus on the violence on the ground and Israel's part in it, because we've seen entire blocks, for example, being leveled in Gaza. And I'd like to ask you what the justification is for that.
I cannot stand here neither for the government of Israel nor for the measures of Hamas. I say that every citizen, be it a citizen in Gaza or citizen in Jerusalem, has the right to live in peace. And as long as the leadership did not push and did not do its utmost in order to promote these conciliatory measures between the two nations, it's the responsibility of the people and the responsibility of the leadership. No, the Israeli reaction is not proportioned. No, the Hamas reaction or action are not legitimate, and both the Israeli right-wing government and the Hamas religious government are illegitimate forces.
You've called both sides illegitimate. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about those political dynamics. We know Netanyahu facing a tough political battle at home. Opposition parties currently negotiating a coalition to topple him, in fact, from power. How far would you go when you're criticizing the Israeli position right now? I mean, is this conflict being used as a distraction and as an effort to facilitate division among the opposition?
My suspicion is as good as yours. I can say Netanyahu has his own motivation, which is very personal, in order to deteriorate the situation, but I've no clue. I've no foundation for this speculation. The only thing I can say, Netanyahu is a prime minister. The time and again, 4 times in the last year and a half, the majority of the Israelis said, we do not want you as a prime minister. A prime minister, even in transition, who 4 times were voted out by the Israeli public and survived by tricks and manipulations, is not a legitimate leader to lead the people into a war.
Avraham Berg, we thank you so much for joining us on DW News to share your view on what is happening there on the ground in the Middle East. Former Speaker of the Knesset, we appreciate hearing from you.
Thank you very much.